Coming up on Arirang News. South Korea will start suspending the licenses of the junior doctors who've chosen not to return to work from next week. A group of medical professors say they could retract their intent to resign if the government is willing to talk. Amid a rapidly aging population, President Yoon vows to expand welfare for senior citizens with more public retirement homes with care services, or the so-called silver towns. More free meals and lower medical fees are also part of the plan. A new high-speed rail service, the GTX, is ready to run next week that'll enable 30-minute commutes to Seoul from the greater capital area. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the tug of war between the government and the doctors. Medical professors who are set to quit in protest of the government's plan to expand admissions places for medical schools hint that they may withdraw their resignations if the government is willing to negotiate. Meanwhile, professors have decided to work shorter hours starting next week, while junior doctors who walked out in protest of the government's plan are poised to face the consequences. Choi Min-jung reports.
Calls for dialogue seem to be growing within South Korea's medical community. Following a weeks-long walkout by trainee doctors, medical professors have also threatened to resign next week in protest of the government's plan to increase the number of medical students. However, speaking during an interview with a local broadcaster on Thursday, the head of a group of medical school professors hinted that the professors could sit down for talks with the government if punitive measures imposed on junior doctors are lifted. The chief added that professors could even withdraw their resignations if the government relaxes the measures. He also called for more objective data before increasing the medical school admissions quota.
We are not opposed to increasing the number of medical school admissions per se, but we think that it could be possible if an acceptable figure is obtained through objective verification. However, the government's plan to increase the quota by 2,000 is not objective data that any doctor can accept.
Meanwhile, the Medical Professors Association of Korea has announced that it would reduce the working hours of hospital professors to 52 hours a week starting next Monday. They will also minimize outpatient treatment starting in April. The decision was made to focus more on treating high-risk patients. Also starting next Monday, the government is set to begin suspending the licenses of trainee doctors.
Starting next week, the government will enforce license suspensions for doctors who have defied the return-to-work order.
The Health Ministry has issued prior suspension notices to about 5,000 trainee doctors who must submit their responses by next Monday. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Moving on, with the number of elderly people increasing at a fast pace, President Yoon vowed to triple the number of public retirement homes per year and pledged lower medical fees as he met citizens today for discussion. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
South Korea's rapidly aging population will see more than a quarter of the country's people being over the age of 65 by 2030, according to government estimates. And with many of them needing support after retiring, President Yoon pledged to prioritize their care with affordable retirement homes and the lowering of medical costs.
밥은 굶어도 자식 교육은 시켜서 오늘날 우리 청년들을 세계 최고의 인재로 길러내셨습니다. 이렇게 일생을 헌신해 오신 어르신들을 편안하게 잘 모시는 것이 정부의 중요한 책임이라고 생각합니다.
This came on Thursday in a policy discussion with citizens on this topic, which was held in Wonju, Gangwon-do Province. Specifically, Yoon said the supply of public retirement homes, which is currently increasing at the rate of 1,000 annually, will go up to 3,000. In addition, since public retirement homes were only available for rent, starting in 2015, the government will roll back this policy, allowing them to be purchased. A project called Silver Stay was also announced. This is a retirement town project with comprehensive services that will be privately run with support from the government. During the discussion, participating senior citizens also emphasized the importance of having meals with their compatriots. Yoon pledged that more senior citizen centers would offer healthy meals for the local elderly. The president also heard from one resident who showed his gratitude to the government for giving him the opportunity to participate in senior citizens' exercise classes.
정세환 선생님 이미 정년 퇴직하시고 아까 13년간 검도하셨다고 그러셨죠. 그러니까 지금 이제 벌써 저보다도 한참 연세가 많으신데 저보다 더 건강하신 것 같고 그래서 정말 이 어떤 좋아하는 운동을 하나 잡아서 이렇게 꾸준하게 하는 것이 정말 중요하다는 생각이 들고.
As for medical support, Yoon pledged to expand at-home medical care, raising the number of long-term home visit centers to 250 nationwide. And for critically ill patients, the cost for home visits by doctors will be reduced to around half of the current 38,000 Korean won, or about $28. As he was in Wonju, Gangwon-do Province, a region that focuses on medical equipment, he laid out ways to provide even more support for the industry. For this, he said better transportation will be available with the upcoming GTX line, while local public education will be encouraged to foster local talent in the field. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Great Train Express is set to begin operations next week, bringing with it commute times of around 30 minutes to Seoul from the greater capital area. Our Park Kwon was on board to get the commuter experience.
Commuting to Seoul in just 30 minutes. A new high-speed train, the Great Train Express, or GTX, is preparing to begin operations, allowing people to reach Seoul City from the greater metropolitan area in about 30 minutes.
GTX's operation will bring innovation to our everyday lives in terms of transportation.
The new train network is one of the pledges made by the Yoon administration to reduce commuting times in the capital area, with 3 lines, A, B, and C, set to open. The A line is set to begin operating partially from March 30th. People using the GTX will be able to reach Seoul from metropolitan areas much quicker. Train journeys on the GTX A line running from Suseol, southern Seoul, to Dongtan in Gyeonggi-do Province will only take about 20 minutes. The same trip by car or on other public transport takes over an hour. The government plans to fully open the A line that crosses Seoul from the south to the north earlier this year, along with the B and C lines in the next several years. An official from Korea National Railways said the government is cooperating with local governments so that rail networks can be extended to other regions outside the Seoul metropolitan area to create an economically hyper-connected area that cuts across various regions. The GTX runs at more than twice the speed of subway trains, reaching speeds of 180 kilometers per hour, meaning that at full capacity, 1,062 people on board can make it to their destinations quicker. This train will run 60 times a day from 5:30 a.m. to 1 a.m., with about a 20-minute interval between each departure. The seats are 3 centimeters wider than on regular subway trains, making for a more comfortable ride. And each carriage has an air purifier, along with eco-friendly carpet on the floor. According to the Transport Ministry, the fare from Suseol to Dongtan will be 4,451, which converts to $3.36 at the current rate. However, there have been some concerns about safety at GTX stations due to the greater volume of people that will come with the new service.
I am a bit worried because Suseol is already very busy, as it is a transfer station with other high-speed trains and subways operating there as well.
Korea National Railways said it had already looked into safety concerns and used methods including simulations and is satisfied that there's no need to worry. Park Kwon, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports for the first 20 days of March saw an on-year rise on the back of strong semiconductor and ship exports. Data from the Korea Customs Service on Thursday showed that outbound shipments reached over $34 billion, which is an on-year increase of some 11%. Exports of ships especially led the rise as they hiked by nearly 371%. Shipments to China, the US, Vietnam, and the EU all rose as well. Moving on. Candidate registration for South Korea's general election started this morning and will continue for 2 days from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Personal details of registered candidates can be found on the National Election Commission's website. Starting April 1st, booklets containing each candidate's pledges will be available on the site. In this election, there will be 300 National Assembly seats up for grabs, with 254 being elected through local constituency polling and 46 through proportional representation. The election is expected to be an evaluation of the Yoon administration, which is in its third year, and the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea, which currently holds a controlling majority in the National Assembly. U.S. monetary policymakers have decided to maintain their interest rates at current levels for the time being. But the anticipation for future rate cuts has pushed up all three major U.S. stock indices to an all-time high. Our financial correspondent Lee Soo-jin has more.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials kept rates unchanged for the fifth consecutive time on Wednesday, following the second two-day Federal Open Market Committee meeting this year. With this latest move, the benchmark interest rates in the U.S. continue to stand in the range of 5.25% to 5.5%. And the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. remains at 2 percentage points, as the Bank of Korea also froze its rates for the ninth consecutive meeting in February. The U.S. Fed's decision to once again freeze interest rates, along with South Korea's consumer prices once again entering 3% territory last month, is increasing the likelihood of the Bank of Korea also keeping rates steady at the current rate of 3.5% at next month's decision rate meeting. There has been much speculation about when the Fed will begin cutting interest rates, with observers forecasting that rate cuts will come in the second half of the year. Following this latest meeting, policymakers forecast that 3 rate cuts will come by the end of the year, consistent with earlier forecasts and supported by the Fed chairman's comments.
We believe that our policy rate is likely at its peak for this tightening cycle, and that, if the economy evolves broadly as expected, it will likely be appropriate to begin dialing back policy restraint at some point this year.
This outlook was met with enthusiasm, with U.S. stocks closing at an all-time high. The benchmark S&P 500 gained 0.89% compared to the previous close, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq jumped by 1.25%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose by 1.03%. It's the first time since November 2021 that all 3 major indices have hit all-time closing records. And during Thursday's emergency macroeconomic meeting in South Korea, attended by the country's key economic leaders to discuss the potential impact of the U.S. Fed's rate freeze, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok said that there is growing uncertainty about the timing of rate cuts in other countries, especially with the Bank of Japan's decision earlier this week to raise interest rates for the first time in 17 years. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States has circulated a draft UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. He's on a tour in the Middle East this week, which includes a stop in Israel. Jung Eun-ju tells us more.
The United States has circulated a draft UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire linked to the release of hostages in the Gaza Strip. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made the announcement while on a tour of the Middle East that will include a stop in Israel. Blinken began his tour by holding talks in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday. In an interview in Jeddah, Blinken said that negotiations to secure an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages held by Hamas are getting closer to a deal. He is set to meet Arab foreign ministers and a senior Palestinian official in Cairo, Egypt on Thursday, according to an Egyptian foreign ministry note, as he pushes for a truce between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. This is Blinken's 6th trip to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas war began on October 7th. The U.S., a strong supporter of Israel, has vetoed previous UN Security Council votes on the nearly 6-month war, objecting as recently as in February to the use of the term immediate in a draft submitted by Algeria. In recent weeks, however, Washington has increased the pressure on Israel. Since blocking the Algerian draft resolution, U.S. officials have been negotiating an alternative text focusing on support for diplomatic efforts on the ground for a 6-week truce in exchange for the release of hostages. Blinken on Wednesday also underlined the growing sense of crisis as he warned that all of Gaza's 2 million people were experiencing severe levels of acute food insecurity. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Monday called a UN-backed report on hunger in Gaza an appalling indictment of conditions on the ground for civilians. The EU accused Israel on Monday of provoking famine and using starvation as a weapon of war. Israel has rejected these claims, saying it does not target civilians and is only interested in eliminating Hamas. As the UN condemns Israel for obstructing the entry of aid into Gaza, the prospects of Israel facing war crime charges of triggering a man-made famine is increasing. 정은주, Arirang News.
A panel of experts at the United Nations have sounded the alarm again over North Korea's illicit cyber activities that have been used to fund its weapons program. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae-eun-ji, has more.
North Korea has obtained half of its total foreign currency income through financial theft via hacking and cyber attacks, and such funds were used to cover 40% of the resources needed for developing weapons of mass destruction. That's according to a biannual report on the North released by a panel of experts under the UN Security Council Sanctions Committee on Wednesday, which said tensions on the Korean peninsula increased over a 6-month reporting period from July 2023 to January 2024. The report said 58 suspected cyber attacks by North Korea are currently investigating on cryptocurrency-related firms between 2017 and 2023, that's valued at roughly $3 billion. It pointed out that continuous cyber attacks targeting the virtual asset industry are also a means of generating revenue by avoiding UNSC sanctions. As the economic sanctions made it nearly impossible to obtain foreign currency needed to develop nuclear weapons and other missile technologies, hacking is used as the main means of earning such income. Regarding the latest report, Seoul's foreign ministry explained that it'll continue to engage in diplomatic efforts at both bilateral and multilateral levels, including international organizations, to ensure the effectiveness of sanctions against the regime.
Our government is closely cooperating with our allies such as the United States to address North Korea's nuclear and missile development and counter such threats.
Experts at the United Nations also assessed that North Korea has increased self-sufficiency in manufacturing the equipment and components for its ballistic missiles. As for nuclear tests, it said while there hasn't been a 7th one yet, the regime has been developing additional nuclear weapons and producing fissile materials as they continue to flout UN Security Council sanctions. It noted that the light water reactor appeared to be operational at the Yongbyon site and that there continues to be activity at the Punggye-ri nuclear test site. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
Former crypto entrepreneur Kwon Do-hyung, or Do Kwon, will be facing a South Korean court on charges of fraud, as Montenegro Appeals Court has rejected his appeal. Yoon reports.
The Montenegrin Court of Appeals finalized on Wednesday the extradition of Do Kwon to his home country, South Korea. In a statement on its website, the court said that it had rejected an appeal by Kwon's legal representatives and upheld a decision by the country's high court on March 6th to hand over Kwon to South Korea rather than to the United States. The Court of Appeals assessed that the first instance court correctly determined that the request for Kwon to be extradited to South Korea arrived before the U.S. one. This verdict means the case is now closed regarding the country that Kwon will be extradited to. The Montenegrin Ministry of Justice will now set the exact date for his extradition. According to Bloomberg, that could take place as early as this weekend when his prison sentence in Montenegro for using forged documents comes to an end. Kwon was captured at an airport in Montenegro in March of 2023 as he attempted to board a private flight to the United Arab Emirates on a forged passport. After remaining in custody from the time of his arrest, he was sentenced to 4 months in prison in June of last year. An appeal against that ruling was rejected by a higher court, and the sentence began in November. Kwon faces prosecution for several criminal charges in South Korea and the U.S. South Korean prosecutors issued an arrest warrant for Kwon over allegations related to the crash of Terra USD and Luna coins in May 2022, which it's estimated wiped out nearly $37 billion in market value. Kwon is also wanted in the U.S., where he was charged with fraud by federal prosecutors in New York. Interpol also issued a red notice for Kwon, which is used for the highest level of wanted suspects and criminals. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news, 2 South Korean crew members from a tanker that capsized in waters off southwestern Japan have been found dead, a foreign ministry official in Seoul announced on Thursday. A senior official told reporters that the ministry was communicating with the bereaved families and would assist them with the repatriation of the bodies and local funeral arrangements. They were among the 8 people that were pronounced dead after a chemical tanker on Wednesday capsized off Mutsuretsuma Island in Japan's Yamaguchi prefecture. Out of the 11-member crew, 2 of them were South Korean nationals, along with 8 Indonesians and 1 Chinese.
With a late cold snap, the air is still chilly despite the sunshine. During the day today, the temperature in Seoul was around 10 degrees Celsius. Temperatures have been slightly below the levels of previous years, and the daily temperature differences have also increased by more than 10 degrees. Tomorrow, with the last cold snap receding completely, temperatures will be higher than today. However, in the late afternoon, rain will begin in the western parts of the country, including the Seoul metropolitan area. And at night, it will be expanded to other parts of the country. The amount of rain is up to 40 millimeters on Jeju Island and in central inland areas such as Seoul. In addition, around 20 millimeters are expected throughout the country. As it rains all over the country, dry conditions will be relieved to some extent. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon and Daegu will start off at 2 degrees, Busan and Jeju 7 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 16 in Seoul, Daegu, and Gyeongju. Rain will be frequent until early next week, but with warm spring weather. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Good night.